to our first rocket talk of the fall semester. And this is in joint collaboration with the new CFAR Health Services Research Scientific Working Group led by Lentz and Charles, who are on the call now. My name is Amy Cornelli, and I am the director of the SBS core at CFAR. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great. And so we're going to talk about three groups that are here at Duke, and we thought this would be useful to core members to learn more about the research resources that are here at Duke that CFAR investigators can interact with. And so we have a main presentation from Dr. Leah Zullig, and she will talk about Interact, which is an implementation science group in Pop Health. And that's really, she'll go in a little bit more about implementation science and reasons that is great to collaborate with implementation science researchers. And then we'll have two additional resources that we'll share with you. One that I'll talk about is the QualCore, and then Dr. Cliburn Chan will talk about the CFAR Quantitative Sciences Core. But we can go ahead and get going. And Sadie here is going to introduce Leah to everyone.
Say thank you to everyone for being here. And thank you to Leah for presenting for us. So Dr. Leah Zullig is a health services researcher and an implementation scientist in the Duke Department of Population Health Sciences. Dr. Zullig leads Interact, the implementation science research collaborative here at Duke. And her research interests focus on cancer survivorship and medication adherence. Dr. Zullig has experience leading and collaborating on projects using a range of methods to implement and adapt and spread evidence-based interventions and practices. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Zullig.
Can you all hear me now? Great. Sadie and I are normally office mates, and I have a new computer today. So thanks for bearing with me as I make this adjustment. Hopefully you all can see the screen. Great, super. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to join you virtually today. We have about 20 minutes together, so I'm going to move through some material quickly. First, as Amy and Sadie both mentioned, I'd like to introduce Interact to you. Interact stands for the Implementation Science Research Collaborative, which has been around for about a year or so in the Department of Population Health Sciences. We're excited to tell you about that group. I'll also introduce you to the idea of working with implementation science teams. We're fortunate to have quite a few implementation scientists at Duke, but we're still finding that this collaboration and partnership with implementation scientists is still new to many. And then I will very, very briefly talk with you about planning implementation research. And while I am a very positive person, I have found that sometimes negative examples are a better sell in this regard. So I'm going to give you a really sterling negative example that I think will kind of sell this home. So fundamentally, implementation science is research that's intended to make what we know is the right thing to do, the easy thing to do. So this is about building bridges between the best available scientific evidence. We often say cutting edge evidence, but really these are often sometimes very, very simple interventions. And we just need to be sure that they make their way into clinical practice. And we know that the majority of new science does not make its way into clinical practice. There's an often cited statistic by Bayless and colleagues that says that it takes an average of 17 years for a very small minority of studies to make their way. So even when this does happen, it's very, very slow. And I think that that is not good for population health. Some of our European colleagues use this picture, and I really like the language around valleys of death. So the idea is that to get research into practice, we have to cross these two valleys of death. So the first hurdle is that we need to move from academia into technology transfer and industry. And you can see we have a decline there where not everything makes it. And then you can see this precipitous decline where we lose the opportunity for clinical implementation. And I think the most common reason that we fail to leap over these valleys of death is because we either don't plan for implementable studies or we don't plan for sustainment of the intervention. And so often we see these things where we do something and it works well in a research setting, but we're either not resourced or haven't planned for how to make that last after research funding dries up, and how to really deliver an intervention with resources that are available in the communities and the clinics where we work and serve. So Interact is trying to overcome these valleys of death and help folks really think about this proactively in their line of research. And it is never too early to think about implementation science, even before we've developed effectiveness in our research. Interact is a team of multidisciplinary researchers. It's health services researchers, population health scientists, and research staff, which I think really are an important component of this work, who use implementation designs and outcomes to create and often to adapt interventions and research studies. And I would also say that our goal is really to bring what works to life. That's the tagline that we've been using. So you can see our leadership team here, and I would encourage you to scan that QR code or check out the link and learn more about us. We're also networked with other implementation science groups on campus. Janet Becker leads a group out of the CTSI and also some groups at UNC. So if we don't quite have the skill set that you need, we're also able to help you make connections within and outside of Duke. So you can think of us as your first starting point. So the range of services that we can provide at Interact are pretty broad. We certainly can conduct implementation science studies, but often we find investigators need help with applying implementation science theories, models, and frameworks. We appreciate that they can be exceedingly dense, and that is something that we really enjoy doing and are happy to nerd out with you and for you on. We can help you think about program evaluation, choosing the right implementation outcomes to support clinical work that you're doing. We can also build and adapt implementation-focused research studies. So if you're truly focused on implementation, we are delighted to do that with you. If your research is a little bit earlier on the implementation pipeline, you might be primarily focused on a clinical effectiveness outcome, that's great too. We can help you think about planning for dissemination, choosing outcomes, understanding feasibility, practicality, those kinds of things. We can collaborate with you on research proposals, on manuscripts, and recently we've been helping on some healthcare system projects too. So we're all faculty who are familiar with the grant proposal and manuscript writing process, but we can assist with an array of project types. We have expertise in both quantitative and qualitative and mixed methods research. We often ping back and forth with the QualCore depending on where it makes sense to do work and who has capacity. We are happy to talk with you about implementation and sustainment strategies. And if you don't know what that means, I would say definitely reach out to Interact, because we also do a free consultation. And so we can talk about that. I'll show you that briefly at the end, but it's essentially the how. How are we going to deliver something? How are we going to get people to use it? And we can plan studies across all different evidence levels with the goal of either supporting implementation or future implementation or sustainment and scale up. And the staffing, I think, is something that we're finding is a great need at Duke. So we do have staff members who have specific training in implementation science. So just as you might need a co-investigator to work with you who's an implementation scientist, we also have staff who are familiar with conducting interviews or helping to design protocols and things with this specific lens toward the skills needed for implementation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the array of services that we can support in Interact. And I also wanted to talk with you about why you might want to work with an implementation science team. So traditionally, we have this model where we have a clinical research team or a health services research team that's very invested in the development of an intervention or approach or a program or practice or whatever that thing may be. And we test that typically through a series of R01s, and then we stop. And I think the hope is that magically somehow this will be taken up into clinical practice, but we know that that's often not the case. And if we decide that we want to do something proactive to push things into practice, we often have this gap, and then an implementation science team might step in or join the initial team. And that's not optimal. This is a really simplified picture here, but what we think would be nice is if we had more collaboration and an effort together from the get-go, so that at the time that we're developing an evidence base for an intervention, the clinical research team is in the driving seat. They're driving the science, and they're consulting with the implementation science team, who might help plan for future implementation if the thing works. And then as we discover that the thing works and it works really well, the implementation science team can help guide implementation, scale up, site selection, adoption, and those kinds of things. And with the idea that if we're working together from the get-go, we can really accelerate getting research into practice faster and better and more smoothly, and ideally designing for resource allocation at the very beginning. I think that we've thought about this a little bit with biostatistics, where we've engaged biostatisticians. It's accepted we do that at baseline. We're really starting to do that well with qualitative methods too. So I would say it probably makes sense to think at the beginning of study design if we need implementation science perspective. And so with that, I'll put on my negative Nelly hat and give you the bad example. So I'd like to talk with you about a really interesting technology, a great technology, and a company that's now bankrupt. So there is this really interesting product called Proteus Digital Health, and they had digital pills. I'll say by way of hands or chat, how many of you all have heard of this technology? Yes, super, okay, we got some hands. I had the privilege of working with them. What lovely people, what a great technology, what an epic failure. I think this is really an opportunity where implementation science could have helped. So this is very much a traditional model. This really fantastic technology was developed, which had huge potential to help people and really revolutionize the way that people took their medicines and promote medication adherence. So I'll talk with you a little bit about this. We won't spend on time on this, but medication adherence is a huge problem, both in the US and globally across an array of medicine types. So Proteus Digital Health was founded in the early 2000s. And in 2017, the US FDA approved the very first ever digital pill system to digitally track how patients took their medication. And the device was later approved in the EU and in China. And this system, you can kind of see this picture, consisted of a pill that was embedded with a sensor that transmitted information when somebody swallowed the medicine. And this teeny tiny sensor was about the size of a grain of sand. It was activated when it came into contact with folks' GI juices, and folks wore a patch on their skin, and then that patch through Bluetooth could collect and record information that was sent to an app. It could go to patients. And if the patients elected it to be so, it could also go to their providers or caregivers and so on. So this was just tremendously exciting. Media outlets were swarming with the news and were absolutely delighted about how this had the potential to better support patients in taking their medications. And we were not immune. Academia was very excited about it too. There were lots of scholarly publications that came out in a variety of clinical areas. Kidney transplantation really led the way, also for diabetes, hypertension, hepatitis C, tuberculosis. I mean, this was to streamline and really get rid of direct observation altogether. Folks were very, very excited about this. And these studies really demonstrated the promise for digital medication systems. And the integrity of the medications remained intact, even in instances where they were co-encapsulated with other pills. It was easy to mail, relatively easy for pharmacies to set up. They said, should have been great. But then in about 2013, someone thought, maybe we should talk to people. And there were some studies in the literature showing that maybe stakeholder engagement was going to be critical. And maybe there were some concerns about this technology, both from patients who were using it and from healthcare systems who really didn't have a way to pay for it or integrate it into their clinical workflow. But everybody was so excited about the potential of this technology that it journeyed on, and it went on to be commercially marketed as well. So Abilify, my site, was approved in 2012 with a sensor in it, really high visibility, really, really high investment, really high potential. But one of the things that became really problematic early on was this considerable difference in cost between regular Abilify and Abilify MySite that had this new technology. And at this point, there was not actually any evidence that taking these digital medications significantly improved medication adherence. It's really hard to justify the increased price. So regular Abilify was about $20, and Abilify MySite was about $1,650. So you can imagine it's kind of a tough sell. There were also opportunities to co-encapsulate. So even for medications that didn't have a specific FDA approval, you could put the FDA-approved placebo in with your pill in this capsule and take it that way. So there were lots of opportunities. And with this, it was found that really a lot of pharmacies didn't have it in their workflow to take time out of their workday and co-encapsulate a medication. They didn't have the right equipment. Even though the equipment wasn't particularly expensive, it didn't fit. It didn't really make sense for a patient to be waiting at the point of care while a pharmacist took 30 or 60 or 90 pills and co-encapsulated them. And that was a little bit inconvenient for everyone and also created a reimbursement problem. So I think this just illustrates where you can have a great idea, really amazing cutting edge science. But if we fail to plan for implementation, we can find ourselves in a really expensive pickle on the back end. So there are important differences in these perspectives between research and real world environments. So in this case, in the research world, we had a very, very tightly controlled research environment that was highly focused on ensuring internal validity. And that is important. But that's just one aspect of science that we need to consider. And as a result of that, there was really no possibility to understand how this technology might impact current clinical workflow. There was no understanding of how it would be perceived in clinics or in pharmacies, or what payers might think of it and how reimbursement could work. There was also no opportunity to think about the patient side and the additional steps that they might need to go through to obtain a digital medicine, if they would feel comfortable having their data shared, if they were willing to wear a patch, if they had a smartphone, if they knew how to use it. And so what we really find is that when these scientific discoveries, and even ones that are incredibly exciting and have potential to revolutionize healthcare, don't take into consider this implementation perspective early on, we have these problems, because in the real world, we have a very, very muddy context. It's important that we consider these diverse perspectives and experiences. I think that's often why we rely on qualitative data, because it's tough to get this experiential and contextual information without really understanding, what's happening from diverse data sources and people. And we need to support the use of technology in this example, but we need to figure out how to support and resource any intervention, even behavioral interventions, and how that's going to be staffed and sustained in the real world after a period of research funding is finished. And so those are really areas where implementation science teams can help. Depending on where you are along this collaborative model, on the bottom of this slide, it may be very, very hands-on, if you're on kind of the right side of this trajectory. If you're earlier in the research process and lifespan of an intervention, it may just be minimal consultation, maybe even to bring to the attention of the clinical or health services research team the types of things that they might want to be considering and keeping an ear and an eye out for as they design their research studies. But there are so many opportunities here to kind of fill in the black box of why and how something works, or explain why it isn't so that we can make refinements. So in terms of planning for implementation research, when we think about implementation science, I think that the field is so jargon intense that it can be a little bit threatening to folks who are coming in from a different field. So I'm just going to break it down very simply and then pass the baton back to Amy and Sadie. So in implementation science, we often talk about the thing. And so that's the thing that we're trying to implement. Could be an intervention, a practice. Sometimes we say innovation. And then we want to know, does it work? So that's typically this effectiveness research question. And after you have determined that it works, that's typically where implementation scientists get involved in figuring out how do we actually get people to do that. So that's the traditional target of dissemination and implementation research. And then we talk about these implementation strategies. So that's the stuff that we use to get people to do the thing. And how well they do it are our implementation outcomes. But what we're finding is that increasingly it can be really helpful to engage implementation scientists earlier, because most of our research is focused on the left here, on the what, on the evidence-based programs and practices, and on the far right side of this slide, on the health outcomes and the clinical outcomes. And when we only focus on those two elements on the perimeter, we have a black box in the middle. We don't understand the how. And that's where we can run into hiccups like the Proteus digital health example. So by engaging implementation science teams, we can help you think about the how.
So I'm introducing a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Amy Cornelli, who is a social scientist in the Department of Population Health Sciences, where she leads the QualCore, which is a group of qualitative methodological experts who partner with investigators in the School of Medicine on qualitative research studies. Amy's HIV-related research interests focus on PrEP use amongst Black populations in the US South who are at higher risk of HIV due to longstanding inequalities. Her research also extends to other infectious diseases, including COVID-19 and gonorrhea vaccine development. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Amy Cornelli and a talk on the QualCore.
Thanks, Lance. So I'm going to talk about the QualCore, and it's a similar group to Leah's Interact, and it's also in the Department of Population Health Sciences. So what we do, so QualCore has been around since 2017, and so we partner with clinicians, faculty, other investigators throughout the School of Medicine. And we help them conduct their behavioral, clinical, or health services research. And so we advise partners on how to design their qualitative research study. And usually it's not a whole qualitative study itself. Usually it's one aim of a multi-aim study that they really want this qualitative help with. And what's really key and why we're not an official Duke core, even though we have the name core in our name, is that we want to be able to use a flexible approach to accommodate just the dynamic nature of qualitative data collection. We want each study to be designed specifically for the needs of the investigators, and we have to be flexible as we go along with data collection, because as we all know, things always come up that we're not anticipating. We want to be able to be flexible with that in terms of budget, in terms of scope of work, in terms of what we do. So that's really important to us, and not being an official core allows us to be a little bit more flexible that we like to be. So who we are, it consists of faculty in the Department of Population Health Sciences, as well as doctorate and master level social scientists and research assistants. And so how we're organized is, so we have faculty and leadership who help the investigators think through their study design. And so it can be, usually folks come to us as they're writing a grant, and so we help them write the grant. And this is something that we do. We become co-Is on the grant, we can line items on the grant, so we help write just as you work with any other investigators. We also have interviewers who are professional interviewers that are employed at Duke in the department, and they can help conduct the interviews and focus group discussions or whatever qualitative data collection that you have going on. We also have qualitative data analysts who then organize, critically examine, and summarize the findings. And the other thing we do is, because we have professional interviewers and analysts who've been doing this for a really long time, they're huge experts in themselves. And so we've been doing this for several years now, where we've created a capacity building training program. And so When investigators want additional training in interviewing and analysis, then our group helps to provide that. And lots of times we then provide that training to RAs on the partners teams as well. So here's just a picture of who all we are. There's 9 of us who make up the team. And then the type of methods that we use, we do a whole host of qual work. Mostly we do in-depth interviews. We do those on the phone, telephone, or over Zoom or MS Teams or WebEx. We've kind of done them all. We do a lot of the one-on-one type of interviews. We also do dyadic, but lots of one-on-one. And we mostly follow qualitative description study design versus phenomenology or grounded theory. It's mostly qualitative description, which really fits nicely in most of the HIV work that is done here. We also do concept elicitation interviews when people are designing PROs, and then cognitive interviewing for when surveys are getting developed. We also do focus group discussions, and we have experience with photo voice. I just finished up a project that was in R21 photo voice, and then we're also starting to do photo elicitation as well. And one of the studies with Charles Ruby, which we will talk about. And then we also do domain analysis as part of interviews, which is just a different way to get people to talk about their qualitative data, so free listing and pile sorting. So we have a whole different, there's lots of different models of engagement. Every single partnership we have is different, really depending on the investigator need and their experience in doing qualitative research. So the most common is QualCore faculty become key personnel or a mentor, depending on the investigator, and then we have interviewers and analysts join. And then often we do have that capacity building, which is really quite lovely, where there's one interviewer on QualCore and then an interviewer over on the investigator team, and then we train them, and then they do everything in partnership. What we also do, it's infrequent, but it's still possible, where interviewers and analysts join the team. And we do have examples of this, which is not too often, but that's when there is a qualitative research expert that serves as the investigator. So they don't need that investigator level expertise. They already have it. They just really need those the expertise of interviewing and analysis. Like Leah mentioned, all of our budgets are based on the scope of work. And so we work through those with the investigators and are really determined on, what do you need in terms of a whole host. We have a very detailed spreadsheet that we work on to come up with what we think are the most reasonable costs for what you need. We have partners throughout DCRI and the School of Medicine. This just lists a lot of the departments that we have been or are currently working with. And then I also brought in some examples of folks, a lot of these folks, I think almost all of them, almost all are on the call right now, of some HIV partnerships that we have. So we do a lot of work with Mary, who's on the call, where these are her grants, but we come in to help manage and help lead that specific aim that's related to qualitative research. And we also do it where one study we're working on now of Mary's, where we are training the research assistants that are on that study in order to do analysis. We're working with Dr. Charlie Burns and then also Lance on the call on their study, Prep and Urgent Care, where we helped with questionnaire development, providing that capacity building training, and then partner with the investigator on analysis. Then we also have 3 more investigators that we worked with, Amelia Thompson, who has now left, but that was also a mentorship thing, where then we also conducted the interviews analysis in partnership with training their RA. Dorothy Dowd's an example of where we have staff that have joined, they have the qualitative research expertise, and so we have staff that are helping them just fine tune their instruments and then help with the analysis. And then with Charles on the call, he has a new grant. He's had a few HIV CDD studies that we've partnered with, and then he's about to start a new one with photo elicitation, so that is also done in collaboration with our team. So we also have a partnership with the Duke CFAR. So if you just need a short consultation for whatever reason, you have that qualitative expertise, but you just want someone else to look at the guide just to get feedback on that, that's something we can do. Or if you want to brainstorm an analysis approach, that's also something that we can do that's free of charge to you, that is covered through CFAR. That's usually like around 1 to 5 hours. Obviously, we can always just work on what you specifically need and try to make that work for you. But there is that option as well. What I talked about before is really, your grant, your 1 to 2 year type work, where we do become partners on those projects. And so to find out more clearly, you can contact me, Brian Parrish, our QualCore manager. This is his information. It's also with all the groups in population health that provide services. There's an intake page on our webpage that you can go in and insert the information that you need and it goes to us, but feel free to shoot out an email as well.
So Dr. Chan is a dear colleague and is a computational immunologist in the Department of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics and leads the Duke CFAR Quantitative Sciences Core, the Duke Center for Human Systems Immunology, and the Quantitative Methods in HIV/AIDS Research Education Program. Cliburn's HIV-related research interests focus on mathematical modeling of viral dynamics and methods development in single-cell data science. His collaborations in HIV/AIDS research focus on modeling viral dynamics, single-cell data science, system serology, and biomarker discovery. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Cliburn Chan for his talk.
Thanks, Lance. So are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Great. I'm here to tell you about the Quantitative Sciences Core, which is a sister core in CFAR to the SBS core. And I think most of you sort of know our existence. This is a bunch of math and computer geeks lurking in the corner, but you don't actually know what we do or what we can offer. So the core is 8 people, 4 faculty and 4 staff. So my research interests don't really intersect much with the SBS core. I'm interested in, like Lance said, viral dynamics and single-cell data science and complex immune assays. Rishi Chakraborty, who's also on this call, is our core co-director. And he actually does a lot of biostatistics, and he's interacted with the SBS core before. He's also seems to have a hobby of managing large consortia. He's the PI for 4 data coding centers. I don't know how he finds the time to do it. And we have Larry, who I think quite a few of you know. Larry's been working in a global health research institute for a long time. He's an infectious disease epidemiologist. He's interested in observational and longitudinal cohort studies, as well as causal inference. And finally, we have Josh Granak, who runs the CFAR Scholars Program I'll talk a bit about later. Josh is basically a computational biologist and expert in high throughput sequencing, and he's especially interested in microbial, immune, and cancer genomics. The staff is even more important. These are the people who actually get any work done. And so we have 4 staff members. Richard Barfield's a biostatistician 3. He's trained in genomics and causal inference. Currently, he works with the Center for Human Immunology, so he does a lot of statistical immune assays and biomarker discovery work. Frances is kind of brand new. She's just been with us for 2 weeks. She's a biostatistician 2. She's a Bayesian statistician trained in building hierarchical models, and one of the interests is causal inference as well, which is very relevant to observational studies. Tyler Shappe is also a bios 2. And he's a bit unusual because he's very interested and well-trained in bioinformatics, as well as being a statistician. So we largely plan to have him doing more of the bioinformatics type work. And finally, we have Scott White, who's our scientific programmer. Scott develops software for science. A lot of software he developed is for laboratory science. So he's created pipelines for flow cytometry and immunofluorescent images. And he's also had a lot of experience working with clinical diagnostic imaging. But Scott also maintains the CFAR EHR link sample database that Susanna Nagli manages. And so if you actually have a request to access samples through Susanna, the request ultimately goes through Scott, who finds the appropriate samples for you given your filter criteria. We collaborate with people in CFAR, HIV/AIDS investigators, in several ways. The most straightforward is consultation. So there's a link on the CFAR webpage for our core, where you can go and it'll ask you. You can request a consultation there. These are fairly standard things. If you have a grant pre-submission review, you want us to look at the data analysis plan, help you with the experimental design with sample size calculations. If you have a paper or grant that's got a statistical critique that came back and said, questioning about the statistics used, we can help you with that. So fairly standard things. We also have long-term collaborations. We've been involved with HIV/AIDS investigators in grants of all shapes and sizes, from training awards all the way to large center and program project grants. program I'm very invested in is that we have a summer internship program where every year we fund a dozen PhD and master students from biostats, stats, and mathematics and computer science to work on HIV/AIDS projects. So quite a few people here in the audience have submitted projects before and work with our students. And I think you can talk to them. And I think most people greatly enjoy the experience of working with these people. It's a good chance to learn how to do team science with a PhD student from math who may know nothing about HIV, but over the summer you find how much they learn about it, and they get very interested in HIV, and a lot of them consider collaborating with HIV researchers in the future. We run quite a few workshops. One of the workshops is coming up, so I think the next series of workshops starts actually in mid-October, October 15th is the first date. And these workshops are called Quantitative Methods for HIV/AIDS HIV researchers. The first series of workshops is going to teach people how to use R for data analysis. And then the second series that teaches you basic statistics in the context of HIV. So those might be fun. Later in the year, I'm going to organize a second statistical draftsmanship workshop with Keith of the Quantitative Core. We did one last year. This is actually a very small group workshop with 5 or 6 people, typically pilot grant awardees. I take them through basically the eyes of a statistical reviewer. When a statistician or bioinformatician looks at your grant review, what are they looking for? What are things they like and the things that they dislike? And then finally, like I said, Josh runs the CFAR Scholars Program, which this is the very first time we're trying it. What this program is about is that if you have a research project that has a large quantitative component, whether you need to analyze data or develop models, this program will pair you up with a faculty mentor as well as a staff person, and the aim isn't so much to do your analysis for you, but it's to guide you in knowing how to do the analysis yourself. And so over a year or two of mentoring, the hope is that we can train you how to do quantitative science and how to collaborate effectively. These are the next workshops. So if you go to the Quantum Sciences page or you just email Kelly Sweeney, she can tell you about these and how you can sign up for them, and they're all free. And so the take-home message here is that consultations and data analysis are free for new investigators. This is thanks to the generous support of the Duke CFAR, which pays for faculty and staff effort to actually help you along with it. Right. So if you're a new investigator, you can consult us as much as you want, and you can ask us to help you with data analysis, and there's no charge. So you will work with staff statisticians, supervised by a faculty member. For established investigators, our model is the same as everybody else. We use a collaboration model. So if you're submitting a grant, we'll go in for some % effort. And it's often helpful because we actually have a pool of staff people you can put in your grant. So if you need a staff statistician for like 20 or 30% effort, there's a pool available to you, which otherwise may be quite hard to get. Some of you use the BIRD Core. I mean, honestly, when you send a request to the BIRD Core and you see the words HIV or immunology, it comes straight back to me. We've got a wide range of experience. We do everything. We help people everything from poster design to T30 fellowship applications to the R series to center proposals to running data coding centers. And so I hope you can all take advantage of our education and mentoring programs, workshops we mentioned above, the CFAR Scholars Program, and the summer internships. And since Rishi is on the call, and Rishi actually has much more collaboration with the SBS core than I do, I thought I'd like to invite Rishi to just say a few things.
Yeah. Thank you, Cliburn. So I just add a few things. I know a lot of you work with me on proposals and then also publish paper together. So I don't want to go into details, but I want to add a few things about if you have some data. Some of you came and then we did analysis together, and then we also published those papers, working on some now. And then also another thing we did before John is here. So the SBS Core, we did the international methodology workshops. Now for COVID is stopped. We are planning to do every year, but hopefully after the COVID, we'll start again to do that international workshop to train the international HIV fellows and scholars to do more HIV research. And then, and then also another thing we do regularly, that if you submit a proposal, please feel free to contact us. We will be able to help you to make sure you're designing the trial or the study correctly, and then proposing the analysis methods correctly, so that you will pass the reviewer eyes from NIH or from the other places if you're planning to submit. Looking forward to work with you in any way we can do will help. Thank you.
Thanks, Rishi.
Thanks, Cliburn and Rishi.